Okay, hold on one second. I'm going to do something here. I'm going to minimize like you just taught us how to do that. Move it over, start the screen. Okay.
All right, so hey, welcome to Val and Stephanie show here. So we're capturing true emotion photography, which is your most trusted source for finding a certified professional photographer. Okay, so we are Val. Say hello, Val.
Hi, I'm Val.
And Stephanie. And so we got married last year, so now we are Val and Stephanie Westover.
We've been working together as photographers since 2000. That's when I met Stephanie.
That's right. It was a fun time. And Val, actually, I can say that he taught me everything that I know as far as photography goes.
And look how good I look when I'm all blurry like that.
Yeah. So, all right. So now we are certified professional photographers, and we've done this cool thing together. We have 7,000 active portrait clients. We do weddings, which are fun. Val and I love doing headshots. Events are fantastic and exciting and draining at the same time, but we love doing our events.
I can see that guy's belly.
Stop it. And I do boudoir. Val does not. That is a deal that we've struck, that it's kind of a girls only, boys not allowed situation, and I love making girls look beautiful. So we also have a one-on-one coaching program, which is very cool. Our participants really go far. They learn how to not only improve their photography, but they also, if they have a business, get to learn how to improve their photography for their business and get more clients and make more money. So right now we have a photography expedition coming up in September, so we wanted to tell everybody about that, because even if you're not part of our coaching program, you can still come. Our coaching students get a really big discount, but if you are not a coaching student, we can definitely work something out to get you a discount. And
I think we have 4 spots available. Now today we're going to be talking about shutter speed and the importance of shutter speed and how to control light and motion with shutter speed. And so in my book, I break it down, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about shutter speed and how to really understand it and apply it and create powerful exposures with your shutter speed.
All right, so as you can see, Val wrote a book, and from that book, it spawned a bunch of workshops and seminars which had us travel to 25 cities.
Actually, this picture right here, we were in Vancouver, Canada,
yep.
And we were actually working on shutter speed.
Shutter speed.
Right here.
So this was where we freeze motion, and then we also do a portion of our live where you get to blur motion. So
you didn't get very high off the ground.
No, I don't usually get very high off the ground. All right, so now we have an online photography course, and actually we are going to be teaching you from the slides from this course today. It's very effective. 8,000 people plus are taking it right now, and
I call it more a home study, because you can take your own time, really absorb the information. And I know that there's going to be some nice ways to be able to get this course, which we'll explain here in a moment.
Right. So in our free time, which do we have very much of that? I don't know about that.
We do fine art, but actually this should be turned into fine art. But here's our topic today: controlling light and motion with shutter speed. And there's times where you can really get some powerful effects. And well, by the way, this material is copyrighted, so don't copy it and use it in your own seminars.
But that's okay, because we'll give you access to it anyways.
So Stephanie took this image in Montana a few years back. It won Image of the Year in Cowboys and Indians magazine, and she was very precise on the shutter speed to get the effect that she wants or wanted. So what we're going to do today is we're going to share with you our techniques and how we look at shutter speed.
Well, and what's interesting is that we're all going for a certain exposure. So we want our picture to be exposed correctly. But part of what makes it look so fantastic is to make sure that you have all of the elements fitting together within your exposure, whether it's aperture, whether it's shutter speed, So you get that perfect picture. So that's shutter speed has got to be one of the three biggest elements of composing and exposing a picture. So shutter speed is controlling light and movement. When you push the exposure button, you are opening the shutter and you're allowing light to strike your image sensor.
Okay, so I think it's common sense that, well, light passes through your lens, the aperture, and then, of course, the shutter opens up, and that is your image sensor right there. So your image sensor can only handle a certain amount of light, depending on the sensitivity of the image sensor. And I'm pushing a button, and there it goes, dark again. So I think sometimes photographers get frustrated because they are experiencing overexposed or underexposed images, and until they really study photography and exposure, sometimes that gets frustrating. But once you grasp that,
well, go back. So a lot of people don't, oh my gosh, what is it? Is it the ISO that makes it so bright? Did I not have the correct aperture? What's going on? And believe me, when you're shooting in manual mode, it is a combination of all of these. But obviously, when the shutter stays open too long, your image will be overexposed.
Or under if it's not open long enough. So everybody wants a correct exposure. I think a correct exposure is what it is. There are photographers that have a particular style. They want to, in some cases, overexpose slightly or underexpose slightly to create, different effects or styles.
Correct.
So when you're dealing with a fast shutter speed, of course, this stuff right here that we're talking about is common sense. You're going to freeze motion. When you use a slow shutter speed, you're going to blur motion. And I get asked every now and then. This was actually in Yosemite. Is this Vernal Falls?
It's the first one.
The first falls. As you're hiking up to Half Dome. So there's just so much mist. I had I think I had a Canon 5D at the time that I brought up with me. That was not a fun trip, carrying all that equipment. I did not have a tripod, and so I had this camera underneath my shirt so that it wouldn't get wet. And I sat down on and took the shot on a rock. I used a rock kind of like a tripod because I wanted to do a kind of a before and after. So when I got to the next shot, I slowed my shutter speed way, way down. And I believe my shutter speed in this right here was 1 second. So that left the shutter speed open long enough to really blur the waterfall.
So we can't measure distance by saying we're just going from here to there. How many people would be annoyed if you said, I'm just going from, how long does it take? Oh, from here to there.
Well, this is what we're going to talk about right now, is how do we measure light that's going to be hitting our image sensor. And so, like you said, you can't measure it just by, a distance by saying here to there. You have to have, precise.
Correct.
So we can't measure light by saying I need more or less light. No one understands that. So in photography, we measure light with stops of light. So one full stop of light. So what you're looking at below, besides the
pinwheels,
the little pinwheels, these are stops of light with your shutter speed. So each one of these shutter speed settings down. Now there's a lot more of these. These are
it's not the full range. There's more than that.
However, they wouldn't all fit on here, but this is just showing you like a half of a second, a fourth of a second, an eighth of a second, a 15th, and so on. That's one stop of light next to another. So sometimes when we are overexposing our image, we can determine by looking in our viewfinder at our exposure level indicator, that little ruler that tells us if we're over or underexposing our image. We can tell whether we are over or underexposing our image by one stop of light, two stops of light, or more. and then we can make those adjustments.
All right, and so I'm going to, before you change the slide, I'm going to talk in girl, not girl language, but Stephanie language right here. So in Stephanie language too.
Do you know how much trouble I would have gotten in by making that comment?
I can make it so because I am a girl. So anyways, what I'm trying to say here is that a lot of people say shutter speeds in different language. So it's a stop of a light. Also, it's, here we go, we've got 1/60th of a second, or 60 is what some people say. My shutter speed is 1,000, but when you think of it, it's good to think of it as a fraction too. So 1/1000th of a second. So and it's just so you understand how everybody speaks and make sure that you know that somebody is saying the same thing you are, it's just they're saying it a little bit differently. So here we go. Here's 1/60th of a second. Here's 1/125th of a second.
Okay, so here's some common shutter speeds that you're going to find on most of your cameras. And but when you change your shutter speed just by one full stop of light slower, then you have just doubled the amount of light.
Okay, so here's where we fall into that overexposed. So let's say your image was correctly exposed at 1/125th of a second. If you slowed your shutter speed down to 1/60th of a second, now you're increasing the amount of light coming in, you're going to now overexpose that image.
By one stop of light.
Correct.
So
when you change your shutter speed by one full stop of light faster, you are now taking in half the amount of light. Now it's going to look a little darker, underexposed. So anytime that you change the shutter speed by one full stop, you will half or you will double the amount of light that strikes the image sensor. It's not just pulling a little more light, it's pulling in a lot more light. And it's not taking away a little bit of light, it's taking away a lot of light. So just know that it increases or decreases by a lot, even just by one full stop.
Oh, I wanted to make some cool little
changes here. Wow, you're snappy. Okay, so full shutter speeds.
So
You go ahead.
Okay, I give this tip and aperture courses if you're in our other courses. And the tip that I give to individuals is if your shutter speed is too slow, raise your ISO. So since we're discussing shutter speed, I'm going to expand on that right now.
So actually, if you are writing anything down on a piece of paper, circle or mark down if your shutter speed is too slow.
Uh-oh, it ended.
Raise your ISO. So hang on a second.
Did we lose you?
No, you guys are you're still here.
So go to our play.
Excuse me, go to assist customer 1121 needs your attention.
I think that's your customer. Let's see here. Let's get back over to where we were.
Yep, here we go. Can you?
I don't know what happened.
Sorry.
We just got thrown out of our webinar.
So that was just a commercial break for you all right there.
Okay, so go ahead and circle 1/60th of a second. Okay, we did that on purpose just to make you laugh, Kevin. Okay, so now there's more advanced tips that I can give to you on shutter speed if you're hand holding your camera. But if you're going to take a picture, let's look at it this way. Your subject is not moving. Imagine you're taking a picture of a flower. The wind is not blowing on it, or a person.
And yeah, we're both standing there. I'm taking a picture of you. You're standing there, not moving, just looking pretty.
So at that point, if you're hand holding your camera, meaning it's not on a tripod, you still have to hold pretty steady. But you're not dealing with action. You're dealing with a subject that's not moving. So you can keep your shutter speeds kind of in the middle range, the range that's not too slow and the range that's not too fast. And so I call that area 160 or 125. That's kind of your middle of the road shutter speed.
But 1/60th of a second is your bottom line for hand holding your camera and taking a picture that is fairly decent.
Yeah, so don't ever go slower than 1/60th of a second if you're hand holding.
Correct. And especially if you want that crisp, clean shot. And that is what we're all looking for unless you want to create motion blur.
So as you're shooting, it doesn't matter what camera that you're using, just keep an eye on your shutter speed. If your shutter speed is too slow and you need your shutter speed to be faster, well, without affecting your exposure, I guess we should clarify.
Go ahead.
When you're in manual mode, this doesn't apply. But if you're not in manual mode, for example, if you're in shutter priority and the camera is in charge of aperture for you, if you're in shutter priority, you're in charge of the shutter speed. So you can raise or lower your shutter speed, but another tip is just to raise your ISO until your shutter speed is fast enough.
That's a good tip. So from now on, just keep an eye on your shutter speed, and if your shutter speed is too slow, raise your ISO.
Okay, so now let's talk about action. When I'm dealing with action, I start around 1/500th of a second.
And this is what I mean when we're talking about action. So action is, here we are standing, looking at each other. I'm taking a picture of you. Now you start to wave your hand at me. If I want your hand waving at me, frozen in motion, my shutter speed needs to start at 1/500th of a second. If it is 1/250th, 1/125th, or 1/60th, that hand will be blurry.
You might get it at 1/250th, but there's no guarantee. So.
No, and there's no going back when you're shooting a wedding asking for a retake if something is blurry. So I would much rather you err on the conservative side and make sure your images are crystal clear and your action is frozen.
So if you're on a soccer field and the kids are running back and forth, and you're panning, meaning you're following the subjects back and forth, you're probably going to be fine at 1/500th of a second. Those kids probably cannot run fast enough for you not to be able to freeze them in motion.
But the minute we get to college sports and to freeze the ball, here we go, we need a faster shutter speed. So,
especially if they're swinging a bat.
Right. So the kids running, the kids swinging the bat, all of that, the child will be frozen, but in order to get the bat frozen, to get the ball frozen, to get their fast little feet frozen, that 1/2000th of a second is where we need to start.
Like those really cool soccer pictures where the balls hit the guy in the face and you can see the ball
smushing
his face and you see his expression and it's frozen.
Yeah, those are great pictures, but yep, 1/2000th of a second for that. So now, if you're going to photograph, so at 1/2000th of a second, you could freeze the body of a hummingbird.
Are you sure?
Absolutely.
At 1/2, well.
The body.
Okay, I'm talking about the wings. Okay.
But for the wings of the hummingbird, which go a gazillion times more faster than even that little body it's whizzing around, you're going to need 1/4000th of a second or faster.
Most likely 1/8000th, but you can try it at 1/4000th.
Absolutely. Do you know what's really cool about this too? Is it's kind of fun when you're photographing an airplane propeller and you actually photograph it at a fast enough shutter speed.
To freeze
it. It makes it like it's not moving at all. So sometimes if you do want to leave a little bit of movement, and hummingbird wings actually do look very cool when there's a little bit of motion blur.
Do you remember when we took photographers to that little airfield and we actually practiced freezing the propellers?
Absolutely. We do that on our Montana expedition. That's funny.
Yeah. Well, that's because their airway is in a field.
And somebody looked kind of disappointed that their picture, because it didn't really mean anything because the propeller was frozen. So you couldn't tell that it was in motion. But
Yeah,
it was
just
cool
looked
that
like
they did.
it looked like the plane was just stopped.
Sitting. Yep.
Okay, so here's a fun exercise that everyone can practice. Well, you have to have a ceiling fan, but if you have a ceiling fan, if you don't, just go to IKEA or something and just lay down under a ceiling fan and photograph the ceiling fan as it's twirling really fast at different shutter speeds, just to see the different effects that you can achieve. So
yep, when we want to blur motion, we do something altogether different. So you remember we said never, ever, ever go below 1/60th of a second if you want everything clear and frozen in motion. Here we want to blur motion like that pinwheel that's all the way to the left. When we want to do that, we start experimenting with slower shutter speeds. And to start off, 1/30th of a second, if something is moving at a decent speed, or if somebody even waving their hand or hair blowing in the wind, 1/30th of a second will make it very blurry. So fast or slow shutter speeds. As a photographer and as an artist, you decide on the effect that you want, whether you want to freeze action with the use of a fast shutter speed, which that's what the majority of us want to do, or to blur motion with the use of a slow shutter speed. And remember, below 60th of a second, we start getting really slow. To create the feeling of movement with water, put your camera on a tripod, find a shady spot, and use a slow shutter speed of 1/8 of a second or slower. Now, you have to explain why we said shady spot for 1/8 of a second.
well, and the reason why is because if it's not shady and you're dealing with a lot of light, your shutter speed, just to have a correct exposure, might have to have a fast enough shutter speed. In some cases, it's almost impossible to go with a slower shutter speed. So
It would be very overexposed. So anything white in your image, especially water or concrete or anything, would be very, very overexposed. So generally, for your slow shutter speeds and your slower exposures, it's kind of fun to use to do it in the shade. But with the next image, you're going to see that you can photograph with a slower shutter speed in the sun. So panning is when you follow or you track your subject from one direction to the other. As sports photographers, it's not like all those guys are standing there on the sideline with their 400mm lenses just hoping that somebody will run by. No. What they're doing is that they are panning their subject. They're following their subject.
everybody does that naturally.
You would think, but we've had that question.
Okay, so this shot right here, who took this, by the way?
This was a participant in Arizona.
Okay, so they were practicing panning with a slow shutter speed to create that feeling of movement. And this is the image that they submitted to us. And they did a really good job. They were actually hand-holding. I'm a little blurry, but that's okay because as long as I'm more in focus than the background, it gives you that sensation of movement in your image. And it makes me look like I'm running pretty darn fast.
And before you switch this slide, we all love to get that crisp and clear, frozen in motion look. And for those of you that do photograph sports for your kids' teams or for for your own use or for professional use, just know that it's a way to kind of spruce up some of your images. And sometimes in the event that the image is the same, frozen in motion after frozen in motion, sometimes it's fun to add some panning shots to your repertoire and add a little spice to whatever it is that you're doing. So I love the effect that panning does. Fast shutter speeds freeze motion. This effect freezes the image and captures a very clear moment in time. I love doing this. It is something that, this is my style. I like panning, but I love freezing water, hair, fur.
I thought I took this shot.
No, sweetheart, I took this shot.
This was when we were in Yosemite. I know, Yellowstone.
Yellowstone. Yeah, the bears are loose in Yosemite and Yellowstone. We can actually go photograph them where they don't eat us. So yes. All right. On bright sunny days, Val will use a faster shutter speed. He needs a fast shutter speed to prevent too much light from striking the image sensor, causing overexposure. We need a correct exposure along with freezing this fantastic motion.
Yeah, and wild children running around like crazy.
Yep. You know that is my shot.
Yes, I do.
Because you would take the perfect picture where they're all smiling, and I love the picture where it's fallen apart.
Well, I love this picture. I think
she did too.
the mom loved it.
I think so too. All right, have fun practicing with your fast shutter speeds with water. I love photographing water with a fast shutter speed. It makes designs and fun things. You can do it in the dark, photograph fountains, and freezing water is so much fun to do.
How do you do it in the dark, a fast shutter speed in the dark?
Oh, well, hey, that's a tip that maybe they need to go to our blog, and that is how to photograph without a flash. So, and how to achieve a fast shutter speed without using a flash. So when you are shooting in the dark, there's plenty of techniques, and let's see if we have time to give away that bonus tip, we'll do it.
Okay,
but,
so here's something that you can practice with, everyone can practice, is get a hose with water and let it splash on the ground. While it's splashing on the ground, or have somebody hold the hose for you. As it's splashing on the ground, use your fastest shutter speed and get close-up pictures of that water splattering, and it'll look like shards of glass.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Either that, or if you do have access to a pool, have the kids jump in and jump in and jump in and take all those great cannonball shots.
Yeah,
really fun.
not with the camera.
No, you got to keep yourself protected there. Or you can find willing subjects to run, jump, ride bikes, flap their wings for you while you are practicing fast shutter speeds.
Where are they going to find cockfights?
Sweetheart, this was not. This was at a zoo, and they were playing with each other. No roosters were harmed during the taking of this picture.
Okay.
All right, so when you push the shutter release button, you are opening the shutter, allowing light to strike your camera's image sensor. Shutter speed determines how long the shutter will stay open, controlling the light. Shutter speed also controls movement. Slow shutter speeds will blur the motion, and fast shutter speeds will freeze them for that moment in time. Anytime that you change the shutter speed setting from one full stop to another, you will half or double the amount of light that strikes the image sensor, depending on whether you make the shutter fast or slower, overexposing or underexposing.
Oh, it's a mouthful.
Wow.
Okay, so let's give some tips here. A slow shutter speed blurs motion. So is there an exact formula? Not necessarily. As a photographer, you create your own style, and how slow do you want your shutter speed depends on the type of blur effect that you want to achieve yourself. So what I recommend is when you go out and you practice, let's say you want to get a fountain or a little creek or a river looking like that water looks like running velvet because of the real slow effect, then you can start at 1 second if you want. If that's not the effect that you want, go a little faster with your shutter speed or even slower.
So a fast shutter speed freezes motion, which is what I like to do.
And then there's times where I think people get confused. It's like, I need to use a really fast shutter speed to capture my son's sporting event. Well, if you went out and practiced, in some cases, you really don't need a really, really fast shutter speed. All you need is a fast shutter speed. So at that point, you now have more light to work with than if you were working with an extremely fast shutter speed.
Right, so you need to decide, are you photographing a little bumblebee soccer player where during halftime they all get on their backs and do dead bug? Or are you photographing a cheetah? You decide what is the speed of your subject, and then that can decide on how fast your shutter speed needs to go.
And then I know that it's not always realistic to travel around with a tripod, but if you have the opportunity to use a tripod, then you will experience incredible exposures with slow shutter speeds. And the reason why is because that camera is staying stable, and anything that's not moving in your scene will be frozen and look beautiful. Anything that moves will be blurry.
All right, so I have one quick tip that is really fun. Summer is almost over, and we're almost into fall, and then comes Halloween. Just know that it is so much fun to set up that tripod in your house with all your jumping little ghosties and ghouls inside your home and create your very own ghost pictures by using slow shutter speeds. Kind of fun to do.
So what you do is you have, let's say, for instance, Dad sitting on the couch.
Reading his paper.
And he has to hold really still, and you're using a shutter speed of 1/15 of a second or 1/30.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the kids jump up and down all over the couch.
Correct.
So
well, or if you don't want them to ruin the couch, then like around the couch or something.
Okay, so then what's going to happen is all the kids are going to look like blurry little ghosts, and the dad will look as if he was normal and in focus.
Correct. So it's kind of fun to do. Fun project. Okay, use a slow shutter speed when you need more light. Sometimes it allows us to get more light that way. You're not overexposing, you're just getting more light in. So just know that sometimes, especially in a dark situation, as long as things aren't moving around and you don't want to freeze motion, this lets us get more light in.
And I can tell you a time where I would need more light, and I would have to use a slower shutter speed. Let's say I was taking a landscape shot.
Correct.
And I want extreme high quality.
Mm-hmm.
With that being said, I would want to use a very low ISO, 100 or 200.
Correct.
So now to create the depth that I would need so that everything looked like it was in focus in this landscape scene, I would need to use a very small aperture.
Correct.
Meaning not much light will be passing through the lens. That means the shutter would have to stay open a long time. I would need a slow shutter speed. Therefore, I would put my camera on a tripod.
Correct, and use a slow shutter speed.
Exactly.
Hey, you're talking Ansel Adams here. So, and if you want to find out more about that, that's in 2 weeks when we discuss aperture. Okay, use a fast shutter speed on a bright day when you have too much light. So if you have too much light come in and it's overexposed, that fast shutter speed will help you keep the exposure that you want. So here, let's practice a little bit. So you don't really have to write these answers down or the questions, but it's kind of fun to review. What does shutter speed do? It controls light and movement or motion.
All they have to do is look at the title, and I would know.
You're cheating. Use a slow shutter speed to blur motion. Now, what is that slow shutter speed? We'll start to blur motion. You really will start to blur any kind of motion at 1/60th of a second and below if you're hand holding. Yeah, and if you hear it in the background, it's actually, we've got some thunder going here, so it's not us pounding around. All right, so would you use a fast or a slow shutter speed in what condition? So for action, we want to use fast shutter speeds. In the nighttime, our shutter speed, not that we want to, it is going to be slower. When you use a small aperture for that Ansel Adams look, you're going to need that slower shutter speed. It will be. And to freeze motion again, we want that fast shutter speed. Use a fast shutter speed when you use a large aperture, and you'll create magnificent frozen in motion images with a lot of light.
And that shallow depth of field.
Absolutely. Use a slow shutter speed to create movement when you're panning. Let those soccer pictures be a little more exciting now so that slideshow isn't quite as boring. What is the primary function of your shutter? And it's to control, again, light and movement. Each full shutter speed setting lets in half as much light as the full setting before it and double the amount of light the full setting after it. Find willing subjects and practice photographing them using all of your shutter speed settings and compare each image to see a result. It is a great way to learn and play with your shutter speeds.
To keep your photography very easy while having control of your exposure, here's 3 things that I'd like you to keep in mind. First of all, when you need more light or if you're trying to blur motion, use a slow shutter speed. Now, in situations like this, if you don't have a tripod, you're still going to need to stabilize that camera so it doesn't move. So there's some techniques. You can actually sit or lean up against a wall, lock your elbows in, and hold as steady as you can. And when you push the button on the camera, do it very gently.
Gently, and a lot of people practice the technique of exhaling. So take a breath, and as you exhale, then right at the end of that breath, take a shot. And then that sometimes will help a whole lot.
And then you can breathe all you want when you're taking fast.
Yeah, but you still want to hold still.
Of course you do. Okay, so, and then number 3, your ISO is going to determine the sensitivity of your image sensor. So your shutter speed is going to determine how much light will strike or how long the light will strike the image sensor. But that ISO, the image sensor's sensitivity, is determined by what your ISO setting is on your camera.
Yeah, and also, please, if you have any more questions about this, and some of these techniques rely on you to shoot in manual mode, some don't. A lot of this you can do in shutter priority or even in aperture priority if you know what you're doing. So, but manual mode, if you need any review on that, you can go to our past webinars that we did through collages.
Okay, so here's how we have our students practice. So if you're new to photography, or let's say you've been relying too much on automatic modes, that's okay. But if you're really wanting to just wrap your head just around shutter speed, then you can go into shutter priority, which is either S or TV. And this mode is extremely easy to shoot in because the camera is going to be in charge of your aperture for you.
But you are still in charge of your ISO. So ISO is your virtual film. So here we go.
So first, select your shutter speed. So you're going to be in shutter priority. You're going to select a shutter speed. Now go outside, not at night, but during the day when it's bright, and select a low ISO number, like 100 or 200. So then what you're going to do is you're going to want to blur motion with a slow shutter speed. So you're going to select a shutter speed of 1/30th of a second, because as we discussed before, to blur motion you need a slower shutter speed. And then find someone that's willing to either ride a bicycle back and forth or
skateboard,
run back and forth for you.
Have the dog throw your frisbee and have the dog go chase it, and do that and pan that subject.
And you just follow them and look at your results. Maybe at first you might think that your subject's too blurry, and it takes practice and technique, but just as long as your subject is more focused than the background, then you've got it. It just takes more practice.
Yeah, it's really cute. I get so many people that say, my picture is blurry. I said, yes, that is the point. We are trying to get blurry. So we only want the subject to be a little bit in focus, a portion of the subject that's not moving that you can freeze in motion that gives the movement effect. So the goal of panning with a slow shutter speed is to have your subject more in focus than your background. It will be blurry. It's okay if your subject is a little bit out of focus, because that's the point, just as long as your subject is more in focus than the background. Keep practicing and your technique will just get better and better. It's really fun.
So here's the steps that I take when I'm panning with a slow shutter speed of 1/30th of a second. So this is for when I'm not using a tripod. I put one foot in front of me for stability. So, because when you have your feet side by side, you have that your body is swaying, back and forth a little bit. So I put one foot in front of me. I hold my elbows tightly in just to keep my camera from moving. And then I hold my camera tight to my forehead as I'm looking through my viewfinder just to keep the camera as stable as possible.
Is that why you have that permanent dent?
Yes. And then I follow my subject's every move. So if they're running back and forth, not only am I panning them back and forth, but as they're moving, they have this up and down movement. And I try to move as my subject is moving as I'm following and panning them from back and forth.
Correct. So you want to mimic your subject if you can, and that is how you're going to follow them, and that background will be blurry.
Yes, and then as they pass in front of me is when I take the shot, right in front of me. That's when I'm going to get the incredible effect. So whether it's a bride walking down a hall in a nice hotel, or whether it's kids running in front of you back and forth.
Horses, animals, so many different things you can do panning.
And just be gentle with your finger when you're pushing the exposure button. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people, or mistakes that people make when they're panning, is when they go to take the picture, they stop moving themselves. You have to continue moving and panning even when you're taking the picture.
Correct. So that's the thing too, is a lot of people stop and they say, uh-oh, the background is not blurry. And the reason why is you stopped and now only your subject will be blurry. So in order to get the subject frozen in motion and the background blurry, you need to have follow through and keep following that subject.
So let's switch it up. Let's freeze motion. It's easy. It's just using a fast shutter speed, starting at 1/500th. And now if you're panning with that subject, you still want to be as stable as you can for real sharp, crystal clear images and to really freeze action. But start around 1/500th of a second.
Okay, and here's a pro tip. So if you're photographing sports, photographing your own children or other people's kids or athletes, take a knee. So if you take a knee when you're photographing them, it'll make them look that the moment they leave the ground, that they're even higher up off the ground than usual when you take a knee. If you're just standing up, you're going to not get that feeling that the kids are flying through the air. But if you take a knee and you get down low, amazing pictures can happen.
Okay, so by selecting a much faster shutter speed of 1/500th of a second, of course you're going to be restricting the light greatly from striking your camera's image sensor. So if you are shooting in shutter priority at this time, during this exercise, even though your camera's in charge of your aperture, you still have to keep an eye on the aperture before you take the shot. Just keep an eye on it. Your aperture is going to give you some sort of warning if you're in shutter priority and your aperture cannot get large enough for the amount of light that your image sensor might need. So some cameras, I don't know, they don't beep, but a light comes on inside.
It blinks, or you won't be able to take the shot. Some people think their camera is broken.
Yeah,
that happens.
Or you will start under or overexposing your image depending on which end of
the spectrum you're at.
Yes.
So just know if that aperture light starts blinking, then just raise your ISO.
Your camera's telling you your ISO is not high enough. Okay, so just remember, by raising your ISO higher and higher, your image sensor becomes more and more sensitive to light, which will force your aperture to go smaller and smaller, making sure that the image sensor doesn't get too much light. So by lowering your ISO lower and lower, your image sensor becomes less and less sensitive to light, forcing the aperture to go larger and larger, making sure that the image sensor gets the light that it needs.
Yeah, and if for some reason this is confusing at all to you, like I say before, if if you take the online course, the very first thing we discuss is ISO. So you really can wrap your head around ISO. And of course, in 2 weeks, we'll be discussing aperture, so you can wrap your head around that, because it is this reciprocal relationship. So,
well, I can give a way to practice so that you can wrap this concept around your head. So if you're in shutter priority and you're just outside shooting, and let's say you selected a shutter speed of 1/500th of a second. Now, if you're in shutter priority, that shutter will always stay at 1/500th of a second until you change it to another setting. So to wrap your head around ISO and what happens to the aperture when you change your ISO, just in between every shot, change your ISO to a different setting. And you'll notice that every time you change your ISO higher, your aperture will get smaller, and vice versa.
So yeah, it's a fun way to see how it affects each other, but it's that up and down like a teeter-totter, a reciprocal relationship.
Exactly. So if you wanted to maintain that fast shutter speed of 500th of a second, and you wanted a large aperture, then you want to keep your ISO as low as you can.
That's right. Yep.
Okay, so by understanding and controlling shutter speed, you'll have more control of your light and the special effects of movement. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is we are going to, I think, give you a tip, aren't we?
I think so. So go forward. Yep.
Okay.
This is a special bonus. This is a pro bonus, and those of you who are pros out there will already know this. So this is not for you.
Okay, so here's an advanced tip on how fast your shutter speed should be based on what lens that you're using for sharper images when you're hand holding your camera.
Yeah, and the whole reason behind this is, believe me, I've had plenty of people while we're doing our workshops come up to me and try to argue this point. As a professional photographer in shooting a wedding, as those of you know who are shooting weddings, there are no wedding redos. So once you're editing your images and you're looking at your images and images are blurry, you can't go back. So for me, when I'm photographing, I want to ensure that my subject and my subject's eyes are in focus.
So here's the tip. To capture very clear, sharp images when you're hand holding your camera, when you're doing normal photography, this is not for action, this is normal photography, use a faster shutter speed than your lens.
Okay, so let's explain.
Okay, so the more you zoom in, let's say you have a 70 to 200 millimeter lens on your camera, and you start to zoom in. The more you zoom in, the more unstable your subject or your scene becomes. Have you ever looked through a high-powered binoculars?
Mm-hmm. And that bear is shaking all over the place.
Yeah, you have to somehow stabilize the binoculars, maybe up against a tree or a window or something, so that you can actually see without the subject in the binoculars bouncing around.
And we are fortunate with image stabilization, but image stabilization helps you stabilize your camera, not the thing that is in motion.
Well, by keeping your shutter speed faster than your lens, you'll have sharper and clearer images. So this is the tip. For example, if you notice that your lens is zoomed in to 70 millimeter, then just make sure that you're using a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second or faster. So always keep your shutter speed faster than the lens, the millimeter that you're using. So as you can see, this keeps the shutter speed ahead or faster than the lens, which is going to result in sharper images. So as we had mentioned before, even if you're using an 18 millimeter lens, still don't go slower than 1/60th of a second.
If you're hand holding the camera.
Correct. At 24 millimeter, still don't go slower than 1/60th, all the way to, once you start going to 78 millimeter, now you want to increase your shutter speed and have a faster shutter speed.
Correct. And so if you're zoomed in at 200 millimeter, you want to do that. So for clear and sharp images of your subject matter, when hand holding your camera, remember we can't go below that 1/60th of a second. And here's a Stephanie tip. Please, if you do want those gorgeous, sharp images, try to remember to keep that fast shutter speed. That's how you're going to secure it.
Okay, let's tell them how they can get to...
The online course?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. So there's a couple of ways you can get the online course. One of the ways is go to our www.capturingtrueemotion.com, select online photography course, and you will receive a 75% discount if you use the coupon code LOVEMyCamera.
All lowercase.
So go to www.capturingtrueemotion.com. You'll find the online photography course. Just scroll down a little bit. There's a little banner ad for it.
How can I get it for free?
And if you are a qualified professional photographer, then you can register as a photographer on capturingtrueemotion.com/beta/photographer-coupon.
Well, that's a mouthful. And then you can use your coupon code for our collages people, which is all uppercase collages and the numeral 1 for free lifetime listing.
Are they, Kevin, are they going to get an email with all of this included? Is that what we've been doing? I think it is. But to qualify photographer...
We're going to send out a follow-up email, and it'll have all of this information as well as a link to the recording of the webinar we're going over right now.
Okay, and keep in mind we have an incredible coaching program. We take those who want to take their photography to the highest level, and we give them the one-on-one coaching. And coming up, well, if you want to know about if we're going to be in your area, we have a couple of events that are happening here shortly in August and September. Just go to our website, valwestoverphotography.com, and hover over events and select exposure and light success photography events, and you can see if we're going to be in your area or near your area.
All right, and then again, hey, we've got the most exciting event coming up that we're doing in Montana, so if you do want to join us, it's more than just photography. So it's taking your photography to another level. We discuss business tactics and marketing. We also talk about fun things like having fun while taking our photography to another level. So it's a great experience.
And your success is really important to Stephanie and myself, so reach out to us. Here's our phone number. Here's our email. We'd love to hear what you thought of this webinar, and if there's programs that you'd like us to develop for you, or if you just want to join us on a fun expedition.
Yeah, and if you want to know more about collages also, and hear our experience and how much we love collages.net, call us and we'll talk to you about that too.
So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Appreciate it.
Oh, of course. Thanks for taking the time to share your knowledge here. I'm going to take the screen sharing back real quick.
You do that.
So if anyone has, if anyone has any questions, you can see the email right here, webinar@collages.net. Feel free to email me, or Val and Stephanie said you can email them or call them with any questions. And then the link for Capturing True Emotion, signing up for lifetime access, which isn't going to last very long, so you definitely want to make sure you get on that ahead of time. There's the link here, and then coupon code collages1, all caps, will help you out there. I don't have many questions for you guys, but one thing I was getting was, is there any way for anyone out there to see the images that you were talking about as you're going through the different shutter speeds? Is there a way to see more images, or where, if people out here wanted to see more images, where would they go? Do you guys have anywhere in particular?
Well, the online course, it shows the image, for panning and all that fun, or freezing motion and that kind of stuff. But if not, our websites and our fine art has a lot of images in which we do panning and all that. And then also the blogs, we do a lot on our blog posts. If you go to valwestoverphotography.com and you go to blog, a lot of our blog posts have a lot of our tips and fun stuff, and we're going to be adding more. So, and I think also stay tuned, because our blog, I think we should do that no flash allowed photography tip that we'll probably put on the blog, and that will be loaded with pictures.
Sweet. Okay, cool. So I hope that answers a lot of those questions. So I hope that answers everyone's question. That is all that I have. I'm actually just going to wrap things up. Val and Stephanie, I want to thank you guys tremendously for hosting another webinar. And also anyone out there that may have missed something, or if you want to go back, we will be putting out a recorded version of this webinar. So stay tuned. You'll get an email from us about that. And we have another webinar with Val and Stephanie at the end of the month. I believe it's on the 23rd. Let me pull up my calendar. You're going to see that down here. Oh, sorry, it's the 20th. So Thursday, August 20th, we have another webinar with Val and Stephanie, but we'll be sending more details out about that as we get closer. I don't know if you have anything else you want to say, but I just wanted to thank you again one more time for helping out with today's webinar and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you. And if you're not using collages.net, I highly recommend it. They are the best at what they do.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, and thank you, everyone out there. We will see you at the next webinar.
Thank you.
Have a great day, Kevin.
Bye, guys. You too.